The worst thing she heard that night wasn't the bill. It was the silence that followed when the waiter decided she no longer mattered. Emily Carter stood frozen beside the small wooden table, her fingers tightening around a worn leather wallet that felt lighter than it should have, as the cashier glanced at the receipt again and then back at her with quiet impatience. "Ma'am, you're still short $12.40, he said politely, but the words landed like something heavier than money ever should. Behind her, the small family diner buzzed with normal life. Clinking forks, low conversations, the smell of fried food and coffee that felt warm to everyone except her. Emily lowered her gaze, forcing a small, embarrassed smile as she opened her wallet again, already knowing there was nothing left inside except a single folded receipt and a faded photograph of a little boy with bright eyes and a gap-toothed grin. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice soft but steady, the kind of tone people use when they've practiced survival more than comfort. "I thought I had enough." The cashier sighed gently, not unkind, but final in a way that closed doors without slamming them. "It's okay. We'll just need to void the order." Emily nodded slowly, swallowing the sting of it, because moments like this had become familiar, too familiar. She turned slightly, stepping away from the counter, but paused when she felt the weight of exhaustion in her legs catch up to her. She had been working double shifts for 3 weeks straight at the diner and a nearby cleaning service, just to stay ahead of rent in her small one-bedroom apartment on the edge of Chicago. Every dollar had a place before it even arrived, and somehow it was still never enough. Outside, the cold April air waited for her like an old acquaintance she never wanted to see again. She pulled her thin jacket tighter as she stepped out, the streetlights casting long reflections across wet pavement from earlier rain. Her phone buzzed in her pocket almost immediately. She answered without thinking, already knowing what the call meant. "Mrs. Carter?" The babysitter's voice came through, careful but urgent. "Noah's fever is still high. It's around 102.4. I think you should come home soon." Emily closed her eyes for a brief second, leaning against the brick wall beside the diner entrance. The world didn't stop for exhaustion, and it didn't pause for fear either. "I'm on my way," she said, her voice steady even as her chest tightened. Noah. 5 years old. Too bright for his own good, too gentle for a world that already felt too sharp. She pictured him curled under a blanket on their small couch, clutching his worn stuffed bear like it was something that could hold him together when she couldn't. That thought moved her faster than anything else ever could. She started walking toward the bus stop, counting steps instead of worries, because counting was easier than braking. That was when the black car slowed beside the curb. It wasn't loud or flashy, but it didn't need to be, the kind of vehicle that belonged to a different version of the world entirely. The rear window lowered slightly. A man inside glanced out, his expression calm, unreadable, but sharp in the way people become when they're used to being listened to without asking. Emily didn't recognize him at first. She didn't recognize power when it wasn't demanding attention. "You look like you're carrying more than you should be," he said simply, his voice low but steady. She hesitated, unsure why he was speaking to her at all. "I'm fine," she replied automatically, the way people do when they've been fine through worse. A brief pause followed, and something subtle shifted in his gaze as if he was observing something he couldn't quite place but didn't want to ignore. "My name is William Hayes," he said finally, as though that explained the presence of the car, the driver, the silence that followed him. The name meant nothing to her in that moment, not yet, not the way it would later. Emily simply nodded once, polite but distant, already turning her attention back toward the bus stop. "I need to get home," she said softly. "My son is sick." For the first time, something in his expression changed, just slightly, just enough to suggest he had heard more than the words. And as the city continued moving around them, either of them noticed yet that this was the moment everything had already begun to shift. The engine of the black car idled quietly at the curb, blending into the steady hum of the city, as Emily Carter stood for a moment longer than she intended, her hand still wrapped around her phone after the call had ended. The babysitter's voice lingered in her thoughts like a warning she could not afford to ignore. Her son's fever had not gone down, and every second she stayed outside felt heavier than the last. She adjusted her jacket again, forcing herself to focus on movement instead of fear, when the voice from the car spoke once more, softer this time, less like a stranger and more like someone observing a truth he did not expect. "You do not have to handle everything alone," William Hayes said, his tone steady but not intrusive. Emily turned slightly, her expression guarded but tired, the kind of tired that had accumulated over years rather than days. "I am fine," she repeated, though the words lacked conviction even to her own ears. There was a brief pause before he responded, not pushing, not insisting, just waiting in a way that felt unusual in a world that always demanded urgency. "Your son has a fever," he said calmly. "You are still trying to find a bus at this hour in this part of the city. That does not sound fine." The accuracy of it unsettled her more than she expected. She hesitated, glancing down the street where the bus stop stood half a block away, empty except for flickering streetlights and wet pavement reflecting the glow of passing cars. Every instinct she had developed over years of struggling told her to decline, to keep walking, to maintain distance from anything unfamiliar. But the image of Noah lying on their small couch, flushed and restless, broke through that instinct in a way she could not ignore. Her voice softened, almost unwillingly. "I just need to get home." William nodded once, as if that was the only answer he expected to hear. "Then let me take you," he said simply. There was no pressure in his tone, no insistence, only certainty, as though offering help was as natural as breathing. Emily looked at the car again, at the polished surface and the quiet driver waiting without expression, then back at the man who had introduced himself moments earlier. Something about him still felt distant, but not unsafe. It was not trust exactly, but something closer to exhaustion overriding caution. After a long second, she finally stepped forward. The driver opened the rear door without a word, and Emily slid into the seat carefully, still holding on to the small worn bag she carried everywhere, the one that held everything she could not afford to lose. The interior of the car was warm, quiet, and unfamiliar in its stillness, as if the outside world had been sealed away. William entered from the opposite side, sitting at a respectful distance, not invading her space. For a few seconds neither of them spoke. The city moved past them through tinted windows, lights stretching across glass buildings like fading echoes. Then William's voice broke the silence again, quieter now. "What is your son's name?" he asked. Emily glanced at him briefly before answering. "Noah," she said. "He is 5. A faint shift crossed his expression, subtle but present, like something personal had been touched without permission. "He is lucky to have you," he said after a moment. Emily almost smiled at that, but it faded quickly. "I am not sure he feels lucky when I cannot even afford dinner every night," she replied honestly, looking down at her hands. William did not respond immediately, but his gaze lingered on her in a way that suggested he was listening more deeply than the words themselves. The car moved through traffic smoothly, and for a brief moment, Emily allowed herself to lean back against the seat, though her mind remained tense. She had learned not to accept comfort too easily. It rarely lasted. As they approached a stoplight, William's attention shifted slightly toward her hand, where a thin bracelet rested against her wrist, worn and simple. His eyes paused there for a fraction of a second longer than casual observation would allow, but he said nothing. Instead, he looked forward again, as if organizing thoughts that had no clear place yet. "We will get you home quickly," he said finally. Emily nodded once, staring out the window. As the city continued to blur past them, she did not know it yet, but the man sitting beside her was not simply offering a ride, and the attention he gave her was not random. Something in her life had already intersected with his in a way either of them had fully understood, and somewhere in that quiet space between silence and explanation, a past neither had spoken of was beginning to surface again. The car continued through the city streets, moving smoothly between pools of light and shadow as traffic thinned and the night grew quieter. Emily Carter remained seated in the back, her hands resting tightly around her worn bag, though her grip had softened slightly since entering the vehicle. The warmth inside contrasted sharply with the cold uncertainty she had grown used to, and that contrast alone made her uneasy. She was not accustomed to receiving help without immediate expectation in return. Beside her, William Hayes remained silent for several minutes, his attention directed forward, though his presence filled the space without effort. Emily occasionally glanced toward him, still unable to fully understand why a man like him would stop for someone like her on an ordinary street corner. Eventually, the silence shifted again, not abruptly, but with intention. "How long have you been working 2 jobs?" William asked, his voice calm, as though continuing a thought rather than initiating a question. Emily hesitated before answering, unsure why she was even responding. "Almost 2 years," she said quietly. "Since my son was born." He nodded slightly, as if confirming something he already suspected. "That is a long time to carry everything alone," he said. Emily looked out the window, watching streetlights blur across the glass. "There is no other option," she replied simply. "You just keep going." William did not respond immediately, but his gaze shifted toward her again, more focused now, as if the simplicity of her answer held more weight than she intended. The car slowed as it approached a quieter residential area, rows of older apartment buildings appearing on either side of the street. The neighborhood was modest, worn at the edges but lived in, the kind of place where every window told a different story of effort and endurance. "Which building?" William asked. Emily pointed ahead toward a 3-story brick structure with a flickering exterior light above the entrance. "There," she said. The driver pulled over smoothly along the curb, and for a brief moment, no one moved. Emily reached for the door handle, preparing to leave quickly, as she always did when accepting anything she could not repay. But before she could open it fully, William spoke again. "Emily," he said, her name spoken carefully, as if testing it for familiarity. She paused, turning slightly. "Yes." He studied her for a second longer than before, his expression controlled but no longer entirely distant. "If your son's condition does not improve tonight, you should take him to a hospital," he said. "Do not wait." There was no command in his voice, only certainty. Emily nodded once. "I will," she said, though uncertainty lingered behind her words. She stepped out of the car, pulling her jacket tighter as the cold air met her again. The door closed behind her quietly, and the vehicle remained for a moment longer before slowly pulling away from the curb. Emily watched it go, feeling the strange weight of the encounter settle back into the rhythm of her reality. She turned and hurried toward the entrance of her building, taking the stairs quickly, each step echoing softly in the narrow stairwell. When she reached her apartment door on the 2nd floor, she unlocked it and stepped inside immediately, her attention already shifting to her son. The small apartment was dimly lit, the television playing quietly in the background, though the babysitter had already left. Noah lay curled on the couch beneath a thin blanket, his face flushed but calmer than before. Emily moved quickly to his side, placing her hand gently against his forehead. The heat was still there, but not as intense as earlier. Relief and worry collided silently inside her. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered softly. Noah stirred slightly, opening his eyes with effort. "Mommy," he said faintly. "I am here," she replied, brushing his hair back carefully. "I am here." She stayed beside him for a long time, watching his breathing steady slowly, her exhaustion settling into the quiet space around them. Eventually, she stood and moved toward the small kitchen, checking the nearly empty cabinet where she kept medication and basic supplies. There was nothing new she could give him tonight, only what she already had. As she returned to the living room, her phone lit up on the small table beside the couch. The screen displayed a message from an unknown number. She hesitated before opening it. The message was brief. "Make sure you do not ignore symptoms if they return. I will have someone available if needed." Emily stared at the words for a long moment, confusion mixing with unease. She did not recognize the number, but something about the tone felt familiar in a way she could not place. She looked toward her son again, then back at the screen, uncertainty lingering in the quiet apartment. Outside, the city continued its steady rhythm, unaware that a single encounter had already begun to shift the path of two lives moving in very different worlds. The night had grown quieter in Emily Carter's apartment, the kind of quiet that felt heavier when a child was sick and every small sound seemed to matter more than usual. The glow from the small living room lamp cast soft shadows across the worn furniture, highlighting the reality she had learned to accept rather than question. Noah was still resting on the couch, his breathing steadier now, though his face remained slightly flushed from the lingering fever. Emily sat beside him, one hand gently resting on his blanket, her eyes fixed on his face as if watching closely enough could prevent anything from getting worse. The message on her phone still lingered in her thoughts, the unknown number and the calm instruction repeating in her mind in a way she could not fully explain. She glanced at the screen again, hesitating before placing the phone face down on the table, choosing instead to focus on her son. Outside, the city lights flickered faintly through the thin curtains, marking time in a world that did not pause for worry or exhaustion. She had just started to relax slightly when a soft knock echoed from the front door, unexpected and precise, breaking the stillness of the room. Emily's body tensed immediately as she stood, moving quietly toward the door, her instincts sharpening in an instant. She looked through the peephole and froze for a moment, recognizing the man from earlier that night. William Hayes stood outside in a simple dark coat, his presence calm but unmistakable, as though he did not belong to the hallway but had chosen it deliberately. Emily hesitated, her hands still on the lock, uncertainty rising again. After a brief moment, she opened the door just enough to speak. "It is late," she said cautiously, her voice low. William nodded slightly, his expression unchanged but attentive. "I know," he replied. "I wanted to make sure your son is okay." Emily looked at him more carefully now, searching for any sign of intrusion or pressure, but finding neither. Still, the situation felt unusual in a way she could not ignore. "He is sleeping," she said finally. "His fever went down a little." William's gaze softened slightly at that information, though he did not step forward. "That is good," he said simply. A brief silence followed, filled only by the faint sound of the television in the background. Emily shifted slightly in the doorway, unsure how to interpret his presence. "I do not understand why you are here," she admitted honestly. William paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "Earlier tonight I saw something familiar," he said. "Something I could not ignore." Emily frowned slightly, still guarded. "We have never met before," she replied. William's expression did not change, but there was a quiet intensity in his eyes now, not aggressive, but focused. "I am not certain that is true," he said. The statement unsettled her, not because it was threatening, but because it suggested something unfinished, something she had no memory of. Before she could respond, a small sound came from inside the apartment. Noah had shifted on the couch, calling softly for her in his sleep. Emily immediately turned her attention back inside, stepping away from the door instinctively. William remained where he was, observing without intruding. She moved quickly to her son, kneeling beside him and adjusting his blanket, whispering softly to calm him. Within seconds, Noah settled again, his breathing evening out. When Emily returned to the doorway, William had not moved. "You should rest," he said calmly. "The night is not finished yet, but you need to be ready if his fever returns." Emily studied him for a moment longer, her exhaustion making it harder to maintain distance. "Why do you care?" she asked quietly. William did not answer immediately. Instead, his gaze shifted slightly, not toward her, but toward the inside of the apartment, as if he was remembering something rather than observing it. "Because I understand what it means to not be prepared for the moment something important changes," he said finally. The words lingered in the space between them, heavier than expected. Emily did not respond right away. Instead, she slowly closed the door to a more comfortable position, not fully shutting him out but not fully letting him in either. "Thank you for earlier," she said after a pause, her voice softer now. William gave a small nod. "Get some rest, Emily Carter," he said before turning slightly away. Hearing her full name spoken again made her pause for a fraction of a second, though she could not explain why. As he stepped away from the door and disappeared down the dim hallway, Emily remained still for a moment longer, listening to the quiet return of the apartment around her. She did not know it yet, but the sense of familiarity she felt was not coincidence, and the man who had just left was already certain that their paths had crossed long before this night had ever begun. Morning came slowly over the city, with pale lights slipping through the thin curtains of Emily Carter's apartment, revealing a night that had passed without disaster but not without exhaustion. She had barely slept, waking every hour to check on Noah, her hand instinctively reaching for his forehead each time as if fear alone could change his condition. He was still resting now, curled under his blanket on the couch, breathing more evenly, though his face still carried the faint trace of last night's fever. Emily sat at the small kitchen table with a half-empty cup of coffee that had long gone cold, her eyes fixed on nothing in particular, her mind replaying fragments of the night before. The man in the black car, the unexpected visit, the way he had said her name as if it carried weight beyond simple recognition. She tried to dismiss it as coincidence, but the feeling refused to leave. Her phone, placed beside her, suddenly lit up again with a notification from an unknown number. She hesitated before unlocking it, her thumb pausing for a fraction of a second. The message was short. "Check the old storage box in your closet." Emily frowned slightly, glancing instinctively toward the hallway. There was no signature, no explanation, only instruction. A quiet unease settled in her chest as she stood and moved toward her small bedroom closet. Inside, beneath winter clothes and old boxes of forgotten belongings, there was one container she had not opened in years. She pulled it out slowly, setting it on the bed. Dust clung lightly to its surface, and for a moment she simply stared at it, unsure why she was following a message from someone she did not know. Finally, she opened it. Inside were items from a life that felt distant now, old photographs, folded papers, and a small envelope sealed but worn with age. Her hands paused as she lifted it carefully, recognizing nothing about it at first glance. She sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, breaking the seal. Inside was a short handwritten note and a small memory card. The note contained only a few words. "If you ever forgot, this will remind you." Emily's breathing slowed as confusion deepened. She inserted the memory card into her old laptop, which took longer than expected to load, its screen flickering slightly before revealing a single video file. Her cursor hovered over it for a moment before she clicked. The video opened with grainy footage from several years earlier, slightly unstable but clear enough to recognize a younger version of herself standing outside what looked like a hospital entrance. She watched silently as her past self spoke to someone off camera, her expression tense but determined. Then the angle shifted slightly, revealing a man stepping into view. Emily's heart tightened as she leaned closer to the screen. It was him. William Hayes. Younger, but unmistakably the same presence, the same calm intensity in his eyes. In the video, she appeared to be speaking urgently, though the audio was faint and fragmented. William responded briefly, his expression serious, before reaching into his pocket and handing her something small, though the object was not clearly visible. The video cut abruptly, leaving only static for a few seconds before ending. Emily sat frozen, her mind struggling to connect what she was seeing with anything she could remember. She did not recall the moment, yet the familiarity in her own voice, in her own expression, unsettled her deeply. A knock at the apartment door interrupted her thoughts. She closed the laptop quickly, heart still racing, and moved cautiously toward the entrance. When she opened it, William Hayes stood there again, this time without hesitation in his presence. He looked at her briefly, then at the room behind her before speaking. "You saw it," he said simply. Emily's grip tightened on the door frame. "What is that video?" she asked, her voice quieter than she intended. William did not immediately answer. Instead, he studied her for a moment, as though confirming something he had already believed. "It is a moment you were never meant to forget," he said. The words hung between them, heavy and unshakable. Emily stepped slightly back into her apartment, unsure whether to let him in or keep him outside. Her mind still echoed with the image of the hospital, the younger version of herself, and the man standing beside her in a memory she could not fully access. William remained still, waiting but not pressing forward, as if the next step was not his to take. And in that silence, something long buried between them had finally begun to surface. The apartment felt different after the video, as if the air itself had become heavier without changing temperature. Emily Carter stood near the small living room table, her hand still hovering near the closed laptop, as though reopening it might confirm what she had just seen or erase it completely. The image of herself in that grainy recording refused to fade, especially the moment when William Hayes had stepped into view with an expression that carried familiarity she could not place. Behind her, Noah remained asleep on the couch, his breathing steady and soft, a quiet reminder that the present still needed her even while the past was forcing its way forward. A knock at the door broke the silence again, slower this time, deliberate rather than sudden. Emily already knew who it was before she reached the handle. When she opened the door, William Hayes stood in the same composed posture as before, though there was something quieter in his expression now, less observation and more acknowledgement. He did not enter immediately. Instead, he waited until she stepped aside, and only then did he walk in slowly, as if respecting boundaries that had existed long before this moment. Emily closed the door behind him, her voice unsteady but controlled. "I do not remember that video," she said directly, watching his reaction closely. William nodded slightly, as though he had expected that answer. "That is because the memory was never fully allowed to stay," he replied. She frowned, confusion deepening. "What does that mean?" she asked. He looked briefly toward the couch where Noah was sleeping, then back at her, lowering his voice slightly. 6 years ago, there was an incident outside Mercy General Hospital," he said. "You were there for a different reason. So was I." Emily tried to search her memory, but nothing aligned with his words, only fragments that refused to connect. William continued, his tone steady but careful. "You witnessed something you were not meant to be directly involved in. After that day, arrangements were made for your protection, and your records were altered to prevent unwanted attention." Emily shook her head slightly, stepping back a little. "That sounds impossible," she said quietly. William did not argue. Instead, he reached into his coat and retrieved a small folded document, placing it gently on the table between them. "It is not impossible," he said. "It is documented." Emily hesitated before picking it up. The paper contained administrative records, names, dates, and references she did not fully understand at first glance, but her own name appeared clearly among them, alongside information she had never seen before. Her breathing slowed as she lowered the document back onto the table. "Why would anyone do that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. William's expression softened slightly, though his composure remained intact. "Because at that time, your life intersected with something larger than either of us," he said. "And because someone made the decision that distance was safer than explanation." Emily looked away, trying to steady herself. "I have spent years trying to keep my life together," she said quietly. "Raising my son, working 2 jobs, surviving day by day. Now you are telling me that part of my life was decided for me without my knowledge." William did not respond immediately. Instead, he took a slow breath, as though choosing honesty over convenience. "I am telling you that I was there," he said. "And I remember what you said that night more clearly than anything else from that time." Emily turned back toward him, uncertainty and frustration mixing in her expression. "What did I say?" she asked. William hesitated briefly before answering. "You said that if you ever had to choose between safety and truth, you would want the truth even if it came later," he replied. The words settled between them, and for the first time, Emily had no immediate response. She looked toward her son again, still sleeping peacefully, then back at William, as if measuring the distance between what she knew and what she was being told. "Why come back now?" she asked finally. William's gaze remained steady. "Because the conditions that kept us apart are no longer the same," he said. And because your son's name appeared in a place it should not have been. The room felt still after that statement, not tense but suspended, as if the next truth had not yet decided whether to reveal itself. Emily tightened her grip on the edge of the table, trying to process what she had already learned, but sensing instinctively that this was only the beginning of something far larger than a single forgotten memory. Outside, the city continued its normal rhythm, unaware that inside this small apartment, two versions of the past were beginning to collide with a present neither of them could ignore any longer. The silence in the apartment felt heavier after William Hayes finished speaking, as if every word had settled into the space between past and present, and refused to leave. Emily Carter remained standing near the small kitchen table, her hands resting lightly on the edge as though it was the only stable thing in a world that had suddenly become uncertain again. Her eyes kept shifting between the document on the table and the man standing across from her, searching for something concrete enough to hold on to. Noah was still asleep on the couch, unaware of the conversation unfolding just a few feet away, his small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm that grounded her more than anything else in the room. William did not move closer. He simply observed her reaction with a quiet patience that did not feel like pressure, but like someone waiting for a truth to settle rather than be forced. Emily finally spoke, her voice controlled but fragile beneath the surface. "You keep saying things happen that I do not remember," she said. "You are talking about my life like it belongs to someone else." William nodded slightly, acknowledging the weight of her words without interrupting them. "That is not what I am saying," he replied calmly. "I am saying your memory was never allowed to remain fully intact regarding one specific period of time. Everything else is yours." Emily looked down at the document again, then back up at him. "Why would something like that happen?" she asked, her tone sharper now, not out of anger but out of disbelief trying to anchor itself. William paused for a moment before answering, as though deciding how much truth could be carried safely in a single explanation. "Because 6 years ago, there was a situation involving financial and legal exposure that extended beyond what most people would consider ordinary," he said. "You were present at a point where information became sensitive. Not because of what you did, but because of what you saw." Emily shook her head slightly, struggling to connect any of it to her reality. "I work in restaurants and cleaning shifts," she said quietly. "I have been struggling to keep rent paid and my son healthy. None of that sounds like anything important enough to involve altered records or missing memories." William's expression softened slightly at her honesty. "Importance is not always measured by status or wealth," he said. "Sometimes it is measured by proximity to events that others want controlled." The words hung in the air again, heavier this time. Emily slowly sat down at the edge of the couch, her eyes briefly glancing toward Noah before returning to William. "If what you are saying is true," she said carefully, "then why come back into my life now after so many years?" William stepped slightly closer, though still maintaining distance, his voice lowering. "Because something changed recently," he said. "A file resurfaced within a corporate security audit. Your name appeared again, along with your son's medical records from this week." Emily froze at that, her breath catching slightly. "Noah," she repeated softly. William nodded once. "Yes," he said. "That is why I came directly instead of through intermediaries." A long pause followed, filled only by the faint sound of the apartment's aging heater and the distant noise of the city outside. Emily finally spoke again, her voice quieter now. "You said earlier that my son's name should not appear somewhere," she said. "What does that mean?" William looked toward Noah for a moment before answering. "It means there are systems in place that track connections between individuals involved in past incidents," he said. "And your son's medical consultation triggered a cross-reference that should not have been possible if your records were still isolated." Emily felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. "You are telling me my child is part of something I do not understand," she said slowly. William did not deny it. "I am telling you that I am still trying to understand why that connection exists now," he replied. Emily stood again, pacing a short distance before stopping near the window, her reflection faint in the glass. She looked at her own tired expression and then at William's steady presence behind her. "I do not want my son involved in anything complicated," she said firmly. "I have spent every day of his life trying to protect him from instability." William nodded again, as if respecting the boundaries she was drawing. "That is why I am here personally," he said. "Not to disrupt, but to prevent escalation." Emily turned back toward him, uncertainty still present but now mixed with something closer to cautious attention. "And what happens next?" she asked. William's answer came after a brief pause. "Next," he said, "you decide whether you want to understand what was hidden from you or continue living without knowing why it was hidden at all." The question remained in the air after he finished speaking, unresolved and open, while Emily stood between the life she had built through struggle and the possibility that her past was not as simple or as isolated as she had always believed. And for the first time since the beginning of the night before, she understood that ignorance was no longer something she could fully choose without consequence. The apartment felt even smaller now, as if the walls had quietly moved closer while Emily Carter stood in the center of it, holding on to the edge of reality the way someone holds onto a railing during a storm. William Hayes remained near the living room, still composed, still careful, as though any sudden movement might break something already fragile between them. Noah continued sleeping on the couch, unaware that the air around him had changed in ways no child should ever have to understand. Emily finally exhaled slowly, her voice low but steady as she tried to anchor herself. "I need clarity," she said. "Not fragments. Not warnings. I need to understand what is actually happening." William nodded once, as if he had been waiting for that exact sentence. He stepped slightly toward the table where the memory card had been placed earlier, and then spoke in a measured tone. "Then I will show you the complete record," he said. Emily hesitated for only a moment before sitting down again, her exhaustion now mixing with something stronger than fear, something closer to determination. William retrieved a small device from his coat and placed it on the table, connecting it to the laptop with practiced efficiency. The screen flickered briefly before a new file appeared, labeled with a simple timestamp from 6 years ago. Emily's fingers tightened slightly in her lap as she watched him open it. "This is not edited," William said quietly. "It is the full recording from that night." Emily did not respond. She simply watched as the video began. The footage showed a hospital corridor, dimly lit, with the kind of quiet urgency that existed in places where life decisions were often made in silence. She saw herself again, younger, standing near a doorway, her expression tense but focused. Then William appeared in the frame, the same presence but younger, speaking with someone off camera. Emily leaned forward slightly, her breath shallow. The audio was clearer this time, fragments of conversation emerging between static and movement. Her younger self was speaking urgently about something involving documents and responsibility, while William responded with calm restraint. Then there was a moment in the recording where everything seemed to pause, as if the memory itself had been holding its breath. A third figure appeared briefly in the background, exchanging something with William before disappearing down the hallway. Emily felt a strange pull in her chest as she watched herself turn toward William in the video, speaking directly to him with intensity she did not remember carrying. William in the recording nodded slowly, then placed something into her hand before the footage abruptly cut. Emily sat back slightly, her mind struggling to align what she was seeing with anything she could recall. "I do not remember any of that," she said softly, almost to herself. William closed the laptop but did not remove his hand from it immediately. "That is because what followed was a controlled separation of events," he said. "You were not meant to carry awareness of what occurred after that moment." Emily looked at him sharply. "Why?" she asked again, more firmly now. William finally met her gaze fully. "Because there were decisions made that involved multiple organizations, and your testimony at that time placed you in a position that required protection, not exposure," he said. "What you saw was never meant to define your life afterward." Emily shook her head slightly, her voice rising just a fraction. "I was alone," she said. "I raised my son alone. I worked until I could barely stand some days. If there was protection, I did not feel it. William's expression softened, but he did not interrupt her. She continued, her voice quieter but heavier. Do you understand what it is like to build a life from nothing and still feel like something is missing that you cannot name? She asked. William paused before answering. Yes, he said simply. That single word created a silence that neither of them immediately filled. Emily looked down at her hands, then toward Noah again, grounding herself in something real. What happens now? She asked. William took a slow breath, then answered with deliberate clarity. Now the systems that were dormant are active again, he said. And the reason your son's medical record appeared is because it aligns with a pattern that should not exist unless the original separation of records was compromised. Emily frowned, trying to process the meaning behind the explanation. And what does that mean for him? She asked immediately, her voice tightening with protective instinct. William's answer was calm but serious. It means I will make sure nothing reaches him that is not necessary for his safety, he said. But it also means you will have to decide whether to remain outside of what is resurfacing or step into understanding it fully. Emily stood again, walking slowly toward the window, her reflection faint against the glass. Outside, the city continued as it always had, indifferent to the complexity unfolding inside a small apartment. She looked back at William, her voice quieter now. I do not want my son to inherit confusion or fear, she said. William nodded. Then the first step is making sure the truth is no longer fragmented, he replied. Emily closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again, her decision not yet spoken but forming in the space between them. And in that moment, both of them understood that what had begun as an accidental encounter was now becoming a convergence of truths either could step away from without consequence. The apartment was quiet in a way that no longer felt peaceful, only suspended, as if the entire space was waiting for something to happen next. Emily Carter stood near the window for a long moment, her reflection faint against the glass, while William Hayes remained behind her in the center of the room, still and composed, like someone who had already walked through moments like this many times before. Noah continued to sleep on the couch, his breathing steady, his small hands still curled around the edge of his blanket. That simple sight anchored Emily more than anything William had said. Finally, she turned away from the window, her voice calm but firm. If I am going to understand any of this, I need to know everything, she said. William nodded once, as if that was the only answer that mattered. He stepped forward slightly and placed a thin folder on the table, opening it slowly without rushing. Then this is where it begins, he said. Emily sat down across from him, watching as he revealed printed records, scanned documents, and time-stamped logs arranged in a precise order that suggested careful preparation rather than improvisation. She did not touch them yet. She simply listened. 6 years ago, William began. There was a containment breach within a financial data exchange network connected to multiple corporate entities, including mine. Emily frowned slightly, trying to follow the structure of his explanation. It sounded distant from her life, but not entirely disconnected. William continued. During that time, certain individuals were exposed to information that should not have been publicly accessible. You were one of them, not as a participant, but as an unintended witness. Emily looked down at the documents, her hands still resting on her lap. I do not understand how I could have witnessed anything like that, she said quietly. William paused before answering, as though adjusting his approach to something more human than technical. You were present at Mercy General Hospital that night, he said. Not as a patient or employee, but because someone you knew was involved in an unrelated matter nearby. That proximity placed you within the perimeter of an event that required immediate containment. Emily's expression tightened slightly. And you think that explains memory loss? She asked. William shook his head gently. Not loss, he corrected. Separation. There is a difference. He then slid a specific page forward, pointing to a line marked with a date and time stamp. Following that night, protocols were initiated to isolate information exposure. Certain records were compartmentalized, and your personal history from that period was intentionally limited in accessible systems. Emily stared at the page, her eyes scanning the details without fully absorbing them at first. So you are saying someone decided what I should or should not remember? She said slowly. William did not deny it. Yes, he said. A long silence followed. Emily leaned back slightly in her chair, her thoughts clearly shifting as she tried to reconcile everything she had built in her life with what she was now hearing. And Noah, she said finally, her voice tightening just slightly. How does my son fit into any of this? William's expression changed subtly at the mention of Noah's name, not with alarm but with careful attention. He does not belong to the origin of the event, he said. But his medical records recently intersected with residual data from that period. That is not supposed to happen under normal conditions. Emily immediately sat forward. Is he in danger? She asked directly. William met her gaze without hesitation. No, he said firmly. Not from what is already known. But the reappearance of that connection means the separation that once protected your privacy is no longer complete. Emily stood again, pacing a few steps toward the couch where Noah slept, then stopping as if afraid to disturb the fragile normalcy of the moment. I have spent every day making sure he is safe, she said quietly. I do not care about systems or records or anything that existed before he was born. I care about him breathing safely in that room right now. William nodded slowly. That is exactly why I am here, he said. Emily turned back toward him sharply. Explain that, she demanded. William closed the folder gently. Because whatever caused your involvement 6 years ago was not fully resolved, he said. And when unresolved systems resurface, they do not distinguish between past and present connections. Emily shook her head, frustration mixing with fear. You keep speaking like my life is part of something larger that I was never aware of, she said. William stepped slightly closer now, his tone quieter but more direct. Your life has always been your own, he said. But certain moments within it were touched by decisions made outside your control. Emily looked down at Noah again, then back at William, her voice lower now. Then what do I do? She asked. William held her gaze steadily. You decide whether you want to see the full structure of what those decisions created, he said, or continue living with only the parts that have already surfaced. The room fell into silence again, not empty but weighted with possibility. Emily remained standing for a long moment, her attention divided between the sleeping child on the couch and the man who had just placed the outline of an unseen past in front of her. Outside, the early light of morning had begun to shift across the city, signaling the beginning of a day that would no longer resemble the one before it. And for the first time since William Hayes had entered her life, Emily Carter understood that the choice she was being offered was not about curiosity, but about whether she was ready to confront a truth that had been waiting for years to return. The morning light had fully entered the apartment now, stretching across the worn furniture and settling into corners that had seen too many long nights of uncertainty. Emily Carter remained standing near the center of the room, her arms loosely crossed, though her posture revealed tension she could no longer fully hide. Noah was still asleep on the couch, his breathing calm and steady, a fragile anchor in a situation that was becoming harder to define with simple logic. William Hayes stood a few feet away, patient but alert, as if he understood that silence was not absence but processing. Emily finally spoke, her voice quieter than before but more resolved. If I agree to understand all of this, she said, then I need to know what changes for me and my son. William did not hesitate. What changes is access, he replied. Once you see the full structure, you will no longer be outside of it. Emily frowned slightly. I have been outside of it my entire life, she said. That is not necessarily a problem I want solved. William nodded once, acknowledging her hesitation. That is a valid position, he said. But it does not change the fact that the system is already reacting again. Emily looked at him more closely. Reacting to what? She asked. William stepped toward the table, placing another document beside the existing files. To proximity, he said. Specifically yours and your son's. Emily's eyes dropped to the document, but she did not touch it yet. You keep mentioning systems and structures, she said. But all I see is my life, my job, my child, and the struggle to keep everything stable. William's expression softened slightly. Those are real, he said. But they exist inside layers that you were never shown. Emily took a slow breath, then finally sat down again, as if accepting that standing would not change the direction of the conversation. Then show me, she said quietly. William nodded and opened the document. This time, instead of fragments or isolated records, there was a timeline, carefully organized, showing events from 6 years earlier aligned with medical entries, legal notices, and internal system logs. Emily leaned forward slightly, her eyes scanning the structure without fully understanding it at first. William pointed to a section near the middle. This is the night you were at Mercy General, he said. And this is where your data profile diverges from standard record retention. Emily followed his finger, seeing her name repeated in different formats, connected to identifiers she did not recognize. I do not remember any of this, she said again, more firmly this time. William nodded. That is consistent with controlled separation protocols, he replied. Emily looked up at him sharply. You are saying my memory was managed like a file, she said. William paused before answering. Not managed, he said carefully. Protected and isolated. The distinction did not comfort her. She leaned back slightly, her hands pressing lightly against the edge of the table. And my son, she said? Where exactly does he appear in all of this structure you keep referring to? William's gaze shifted slightly, more serious now. He appears only recently, he said. Which is why it is unexpected. There should be no direct continuity from that period to his current medical footprint. Emily's expression tightened. Then why is he connected at all? She asked. William took a moment before responding. That is what I am still determining, he said. A silence followed, heavier than before, not because of fear but because of unresolved implication. Emily stood again, moving slowly toward the window, as if distance from the table might allow clearer thought. Outside, the city continued its usual rhythm, unaware of the conversation unfolding above it. She spoke without turning back. I do not trust systems I cannot see, she said. William replied calmly. Neither do I. That answer caused her to glance back at him briefly. It was not what she expected. He continued, his tone steady but more personal now. That is why I am here directly, he said. Because what is happening is not purely administrative anymore. It is intersecting with real lives again, and I cannot allow assumptions to fill the gaps. Emily turned fully toward him. Then tell me the truth without structure or terminology, she said. William met her gaze. The truth is that your presence is no longer statistically isolated, he said. And your son's medical record triggered a pattern recognition that should not exist unless previous containment was incomplete. Emily closed her eyes briefly, then reopened them. So what happens now? She asked again, slower this time. William answered without hesitation. Now we confirm whether this is coincidence or continuation, he said. Emily returned to the table, sitting down once more, her exhaustion now mixed with a focused clarity that had not been there before. She looked at Noah, still asleep, then back at William. And if it is continuation? She asked. What does that mean for him? William's response was immediate but measured. It means he is not being observed as an individual alone, he said. He is being recognized as part of a pattern that should not currently exist. Emily exhaled slowly, her hand instinctively moving closer to the couch where her son slept. I will not allow anything to happen to him, she said firmly. William nodded. That is understood, he replied. And in that moment, without any dramatic shift or external interruption, the room settled into a new kind of reality, one where questions no longer belonged to the past alone, and where every answer carried the weight of consequences either of them could yet fully see. The apartment remained quiet after the last exchange, but it was no longer the same kind of quiet as before. It felt structured now, as if silence itself had become part of something organized rather than accidental. Emily Carter sat at the table with her hands resting flat on the surface, her posture steady but her mind visibly working through every layer of what she had just been told. Across from her, William Hayes remained composed, observing not her reaction alone but the subtle changes in her decision-making as though he could see patterns forming in real time. Noah continued to sleep on the couch, unaffected by the tension in the room, his small presence grounding Emily in a way nothing else could. Finally, Emily spoke, her voice quieter but more precise than before. "If what you are saying is true," she said, "then there must be records beyond what you have shown me." William nodded once. "There are," he replied. "But access is restricted until confirmation conditions are met." Emily frowned slightly. "And what exactly are those conditions?" she asked. William paused, then answered with careful clarity. "Verification of continuity," he said. "Meaning we confirm whether your current situation is isolated or part of an ongoing chain of events connected to 6 years ago." Emily leaned back slightly, absorbing the weight of the explanation. "So my life is being evaluated like a system," she said. William did not deny it. "Not your life," he corrected. "The pattern surrounding it." Emily let out a slow breath, her eyes drifting toward her son again before returning to William. "I do not care about patterns," she said firmly. "I care about whether my son and I are safe right now." William's expression softened slightly. "That is exactly why this process exists," he said. "To determine safety before exposure increases." Emily studied him for a long moment, then looked down at the table. "Every answer you give creates more questions," she said quietly. William nodded. "That is the nature of incomplete context," he replied. Before Emily could respond, her phone vibrated sharply on the table, breaking the controlled stillness of the room. Both she and William looked at it immediately. Emily hesitated before picking it up. The screen showed a message from an unknown sender. The message contained only one line: "Do not confirm anything without reviewing the second file." Emily's expression tightened slightly as she looked up at William. "Did you send this?" she asked. William shook his head once, immediately. "No," he said. The confirmation was instant and unambiguous. A brief silence followed as Emily placed the phone down carefully. William's attention shifted subtly, his focus sharpening. "That message did not come through standard channels," he said. Emily's voice lowered. "Then who did it come from?" she asked. William did not answer immediately. Instead, he stood slowly and moved toward the table, studying the phone without touching it. "It means there is at least one additional party monitoring the same data convergence," he said finally. Emily's body tensed slightly. "Monitoring my son," she clarified. William nodded. "Indirectly," he said. "Through correlation points." Emily stood immediately now, moving instinctively toward Noah on the couch as if distance alone could protect him. "I do not like any of this," she said firmly. William turned toward her, his tone steady but more serious than before. "Neither do I," he said. Emily looked at him sharply. Then, "Stop speaking like this is something abstract," she replied. "This is my child." William held her gaze without flinching. "That is why I am still here," he said. A quiet tension settled again in the room, not chaotic but focused. Emily gently adjusted the blanket on Noah, her hand lingering there for a moment before she turned back toward William. "If there is a second file," she said carefully, "then I want to see it." William nodded once, as if that request aligned with what he had already anticipated. "It is not stored locally," he said. "It must be retrieved from a secured archive." Emily crossed her arms slightly. "Then retrieve it," she said. William hesitated only briefly before responding. "That process requires confirmation from you," he said. Emily frowned. "Confirmation of what?" she asked. William's answer was simple but carried significant weight. That you are willing to fully reopen the sequence of events from 6 years ago, he said. Emily stood still for a moment, her eyes shifting between him and her son, the reality of the decision becoming clearer with each passing second. The apartment felt smaller again, not physically, but in the way choices now seemed to close around her rather than expand. Finally, she spoke. If I say yes, she asked, what changes immediately? William answered without hesitation. Access expands, he said, and attention increases. Emily exhaled slowly, then nodded once, more to herself than to him. Then I want the truth, she said quietly. William met her gaze, acknowledging the decision without celebration or relief. Then we proceed, he said. And in that moment, the quiet stability of the apartment shifted again, not through action, but through acceptance, as a hidden layer of information prepared to surface into a life that could no longer remain unchanged. The atmosphere inside the apartment had shifted again, not through movement but through consequence, as if the decision Emily Carter had just made had altered the weight of the air itself. She stood near the couch for a moment, watching Noah sleep, her hand resting lightly on the back of the sofa as if confirming that he was still part of a world she understood. William Hayes remained near the table, already preparing something on his device without rushing, as though the next step had been waiting for this exact moment to activate. Emily finally broke the silence, her voice steady but carrying a new seriousness. If I am doing this, she said, then I need to know exactly what I am agreeing to. William nodded once without looking up. You are agreeing to full disclosure of a secured historical sequence, he replied. Emily frowned slightly. In normal terms, she said. William paused, then responded in simpler language. You will see everything that happened 6 years ago, including what was removed from public record and why your presence was flagged. Emily exhaled slowly, then nodded. Then show me, she said. William connected his device to the laptop again, this time entering a secure access sequence that took longer than before. The screen flickered, then shifted into a darker interface, minimal and structured, displaying a single folder labeled with a code instead of a name. He opened it. The first file loaded was not video this time, but a composite timeline, layered with timestamps, locations, and redacted entries that slowly began to resolve as the system decrypted them. Emily leaned forward without realizing it, her focus narrowing as she followed the sequence. William pointed to the earliest entry. This marks the initial incident window, he said. Emily watched as multiple system logs appeared across different agencies and corporate entities, all converging on a single geographic area near Mercy General Hospital on the same night she had already seen fragments of. I was there, she said quietly, more to herself than to him. William nodded. Yes, he said. But not in the capacity you remember. The timeline continued to unfold, showing overlapping movements of personnel and data transfers that Emily could not fully interpret but could feel were significant. Then a specific segment highlighted itself automatically, drawing attention to her identity marker within the system. Emily's expression tightened as she saw her name appear across multiple entries, each one labeled with restricted access. Markers that had been partially cleared only recently. Why is my name attached to all of this? She asked. William responded without hesitation. Because you were the only civilian present during a critical transition window, he said. Not as a participant, but as an unplanned witness to procedural divergence. Emily looked up sharply. I do not understand what that means, she said. William closed the gaps slightly between them, pointing at a secondary file that had just unlocked. It means that certain decisions were made in real time to prevent exposure of sensitive information, he said. And during that process, your personal record was compartmentalized to ensure you could not be traced back to the event afterward. Emily stared at the screen, her breathing slowing as the implications settled. So my life was adjusted, she said carefully. William corrected her gently. Not your life, he said. Your visibility within a specific framework. Emily stood up again, pacing slowly now, her thoughts clearly overwhelmed but controlled. And Noah, she said suddenly, stopping. Where does he fit into something that happened 6 years before he was even born? William's expression changed slightly, more focused now. That is what triggered the current alert, he said. His medical record accessed a legacy system node that should have remained inactive. That connection should not exist under normal continuity. Emily turned toward him quickly. So you are saying his existence is causing something to react? She asked. William nodded once. Not his existence alone, he clarified. But the overlap between his data and yours. Emily placed a hand briefly on her forehead, processing the information. This is not my world, she said quietly. William answered calmly. It has been intersecting with your world longer than you realized, he said. A silence followed, deeper than before, not empty but full of implication. Emily walked slowly back toward the couch, sitting beside her son again, her hand resting protectively near his. If I continue to look at this, she said, there is no way to go back, is there? William did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was steady. There is always a way to step away, he said. But there is no way to undo awareness once it is complete. Emily looked at Noah for a long moment, then back at William. Then I need to be sure he is not the one who pays for it, she said firmly. William nodded. That is already my priority, he said. Emily exhaled slowly, then turned back to the screen, her decision now no longer theoretical. Continue, she said quietly. William resumed the sequence, and the interface shifted again, unlocking a deeper layer of information that had remained sealed until this exact moment. And as the next set of records began to appear, both of them understood that the truth they were now entering was no longer fragmented, but connected in ways that would permanently redefine everything Emily believed about her past and the life she had built since. The deeper layer of data unfolded across the laptop screen like a structured memory the system had been holding back for years, revealing connections that were never meant to be seen in sequence, but now appeared aligned under William Hayes' controlled access. Emily Carter remained seated beside the couch, her hand resting protectively near Noah as she watched the shifting interface, her expression no longer purely confused but increasingly focused, as if her mind had shifted from emotional reaction to forced comprehension. William stood slightly behind her now, not invading her space but close enough to guide the sequence as it progressed. The screen displayed a final classification layer marked with a neutral label rather than a warning, suggesting that what remained was not danger but resolution. William spoke quietly, his tone steady but more personal than before. This is the final consolidated record, he said. Emily did not respond immediately, her eyes fixed on the screen as the data resolved into a single continuous timeline connecting the hospital incident from 6 years ago to every fragmented entry she had seen before. Start it, she said finally. William pressed a key, and the video sequence began. The footage was clearer than before, no longer fragmented or partially obscured. It showed Emily from years earlier. Standing inside a controlled hospital corridor, her expression tense but determined, speaking with William Hayes in a way that suggested urgency and trust rather than confusion. Emily, watching now, leaned forward slightly, her breath slowing as she observed herself interacting with him in a way she could not recall at all. William in the present remained silent as the footage continued. In the video, Emily's past self appeared to be handing over or receiving a sealed document, while speaking in a low but deliberate tone. William in the recording responded with measured calm, then nodded, as though acknowledging an agreement that carried weight beyond the moment itself. The video continued for several seconds longer, showing coordinated movement between medical staff, administrative personnel, and secure data handling protocols that reinforced the controlled nature of the situation. Then, the footage ended abruptly, replaced again by the system interface. Emily remained completely still for a moment, absorbing what she had just seen. That was me, she said quietly, not as a question but as a confirmation she was still struggling to accept. William nodded. Yes, he said. Emily slowly turned toward him, her voice more grounded now. And everything you told me before about separation and memory control," she said. "That is what happened after this." William answered without hesitation. "Yes," he said again. A long silence followed, during which Emily looked toward Noah, then back at the screen, then finally down at her hands. The reality she was processing was no longer abstract. It was layered, documented, and irreversible in its structure. "Why show me this now?" she asked finally. William's expression remained steady but carried a weight that had not been present earlier. "Because the system that created separation has begun reactivating," he said. "And when that happens, the original boundaries no longer hold." Emily stood slowly, walking a few steps away from the couch before stopping near the window again, as if trying to regain perspective through distance. "You keep talking about systems and boundaries," she said, her voice calmer now but more precise. "But all I see is my life being pulled into something I never asked for." William followed her movement with his eyes but did not approach further. "You were never the origin of it," he said. "But you were part of its structure during a critical point. That connection cannot be ignored once it reappears." Emily turned back toward him. "And my son," she said firmly. "Where does he stand in any of this?" William paused briefly before responding. "He is the current convergence point," he said. "Not because of what he is, but because of what your records and his records now overlap through external systems that should have remained separate." Emily closed her eyes for a moment, then reopened them, her voice steady. "Then I need to know what happens next in plain terms," she said. William nodded once. "Next, there will be verification requests from external monitoring points," he said. "And your decision will determine whether those systems escalate or remain contained." Emily looked toward Noah again, then back at William. "I will not let anything reach him," she said firmly. William met her gaze. "That is also my objective," he replied. The room fell into a final silence, not of confusion anymore, but of alignment between understanding and consequence. Emily returned to the couch and sat beside her son, her hand resting lightly on his blanket as she watched him sleep. The truth had not ended, but it had finally become complete enough to change the direction of everything that would follow.